The cold stone of the scullery floor was a familiar enemy. It seeped through the thin soles of Elara's worn-out slippers, a constant nagging chill that mirrored the hollow ache in her stomach. For 3 days, she had subsisted on little more than dishwater-thin broth and a stolen crust of bread, her punishment for dropping a platter of roasted pheasant during the last banquet. Here, in the cavernous, steam-choked kitchens of the Blackmir fortress, waste was a sin, and a scullery maid was less than nothing, invisible, expendable. Tonight, the fortress thrummed with a nervous energy that vibrated up through the stone. It was the night of the Blood Moon Concord, a mandatory gathering of the vassal lords to renew their fealty to the Alpha King. Upstairs, the great hall would be a kaleidoscope of shimmering silks and glittering jewels, the air thick with the scent of spiced wine and roasting meats. Down here, the air was thick with the stench of boiled cabbage and the acrid smoke of the overworked fires. Elara's world was one of gray stone, gray water, and the gray exhaustion that settled deep in her bones. Her hands, raw and red from the lye soap, scrubbed relentlessly at a soot-blackened pot. Beside her, Lila, her only friend in this miserable place, worked with a frantic haste. "They say Lord Valerius of the Vanthorn lands looks especially sour tonight," Lila whispered, her voice barely a hiss over the clang of metal on stone. "Cook heard 2 guards talking. Said he's been petitioning the king's council about the failing crops in the west." Elara grunted, not bothering to look up. The lords are always sour about something. What did it matter to her? Their politics were as distant as the stars. Her concerns were the mountain of greasy pots, the gnawing hunger, and avoiding the head cook's heavy hand. Still, she couldn't entirely ignore the oppressive atmosphere. Sometimes, when her hunger was sharpest or her exhaustion deepest, she saw things. Faint, shimmering auras of light around people. Lila's was a soft, gentle yellow, like spring sunshine. The head cook's was a murky, angry red. She had long ago dismissed these visions as a product of an empty stomach and a tired mind, little flickers of madness in the gloom. Tonight, however, the air itself seemed to crackle with unseen energies, a web of visceral tensions that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She saw jagged spikes of violet and arsenic green flickering around the guards who stalked the corridors, a sight that made her stomach clench with a fear that had nothing to do with hunger. A sudden sharp bell cut through the kitchen's din. The king's personal table required more wine. The steward, a man with a perpetually pinched face, stabbed a finger in Elara's direction. "You, the quiet one, take it, and try not to foul this up like you did the pheasant." Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. The great hall. She was never supposed to go there, not during a formal event. She was a creature of the shadows, of the scullery. But to refuse was to invite a beating, or worse, to be thrown out into the cold dark with nothing. Swallowing hard, she wiped her trembling hands on her apron, took the heavy silver flagon of deep red wine, and slipped out of the kitchen. The transition was jarring. She moved from the grimy, oppressive heat of the kitchens into a service corridor, and then, through a small, curtained archway, into the blinding spectacle of the great hall. The sheer volume of it all struck her like a physical blow. Hundreds of candles burned in massive iron chandeliers, their light glinting off polished armor, silver goblets, and the gems sewn into the doublets of sneering lords. The air was a cacophony of laughter, murmured conversations, and the music of a lone harpist, all underpinned by a palpable predatory tension. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her worn slippers looking obscene against the polished marble. She navigated the crowded space, a ghost weaving between titans. Her destination was the high table, set upon a dais, where the Alpha King sat upon a throne carved from the black heart of a petrified weirwood tree. She had only ever seen him from a distance, a massive, intimidating figure, more myth than man. King Kael of the Blackmir line. As she drew closer, she chanced a single, fleeting glance. He was even larger than the stories claimed. Broad-shouldered and clad in black leather and fur, he was a study in contained violence. His dark hair was long, tied back from a severe, brooding face. He wasn't speaking, merely listening to a foppish lord at his side, his expression unreadable. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were not brown or black, but a startling, luminous gold, molten, burning. They swept the room with an unnerving intensity, and for a terrifying second, she felt them pass over her, dismissing her as part of the scenery. Her gaze flickered to the man on the king's other side. Lord Valerius. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp way, with pale eyes and a smile that never reached them. A faint, sickly aura of blackish-purple light clung to him, a color she had never seen before. It pulsed with a quiet malevolence that made her feel ill. He raised his goblet to the king in a toast, his movements smooth and practiced. The king nodded curtly and drained his own cup. That was when it happened. A low growl, more animal than human, vibrated from the king's chest. The harp music faltered. A hush began to fall over the hall. King Kael gripped the arms of his throne, his knuckles turning white. A tremor ran through his massive frame. The golden eyes flared, the pupils elongating, becoming something feral. "Your Majesty?" Lord Valerius asked, his voice laced with a perfectly pitched note of concern. The king didn't answer. He threw his head back and a roar of pure, unadulterated agony and rage tore from his throat. It was not the sound of a man. It was the sound of a predator, wounded and enraged, a sound that shattered goblets and sent a visceral wave of terror crashing through the hall. Panic erupted. Nobles scrambled back, overturning chairs. Women screamed. In a sickening crunch of breaking bones and tearing flesh, he changed. His body contorted, expanding, covered in a sudden, thick coat of midnight black fur. He swelled to an impossible size, his clothes shredding away as a monstrous, dire wolf form emerged. It was a beast from the darkest nightmares, larger than a pony, with teeth like daggers, and those same molten gold eyes now blazing with insane, feral light. The poison. It wasn't a poison to kill. It was a poison to unmake the man, to unleash the beast in its rawest, most uncontrollable form. The royal guards, the famed Obsidian Guard, drew their silver-etched swords, forming a hesitant circle. They were his men, loyal to the death. But what could they do against their own king, turned into a mindless engine of destruction? The wolf swiped a massive paw, sending 3 armored men flying across the room like broken dolls. It lunged, its jaws snapping inches from a fleeing lord's throat. In the chaos, Elara was knocked to the ground. The heavy silver flagon clattered away, spilling a river of red wine across the white marble like blood. She landed hard, her head striking the stone, and for a moment the world swam in a dizzying haze. When her vision cleared, the beast was there. It had plowed through the terrified crowd and now stood over her, its shadow a suffocating blanket. It had cornered her against the dais. Saliva, thick and stringy, dripped from its snarling jaws. The air was filled with its hot, musky scent, the smell of blood and wild fury. This was it. This was her end, a short, miserable life, ending as a smear on the floor of the great hall, torn apart by a mad king. The crowd held its breath, a collective gasp of horror. The guards were frozen, afraid to attack their king, afraid not to. But as she looked into those burning, maddened eyes, she felt something other than terror. It was a strange, inexplicable pull, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to originate from the very core of her being, reaching out to the frantic, chaotic energy pouring off the beast. The shimmering auras she usually saw were gone, replaced by this one singular connection. It was a song of pure agony, and her soul, for some reason, knew the harmony. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her body moved on an instinct far older and deeper than conscious thought. Slowly, her hand, still grimy from the scullery, trembling but resolute, lifted. She reached out, not in defense, but in offering. The beast roared, a deafening blast of sound that should have sent her cowering. Instead, she pushed forward. She pressed her palm flat against the side of its massive, snarling muzzle. A gasp went through the hall. It was a suicidal gesture, an invitation to have her arm torn from its socket. But the moment her skin made contact, a soft, silvery light bloomed from her palm. It wasn't bright or flashy, but it was pure and steady, like moonlight on calm water. It flowed from her into the beast, a visible current of peace. The visceral, rage-filled vibrations pouring from the wolf shuddered. The deep, guttural snarl caught in its throat, dying with a wet choke. The beast lowered its head and stilled. The massive body, coiled with enough power to destroy the entire hall, went utterly slack beneath her touch. The terrifying, dagger-like teeth were inches from her face, but the snarl was gone. The molten gold eyes, which had been burning with feral madness, cleared. The insanity receded like a tide, replaced by a dawning, profound, and utter shock. It stared at her, this colossal creature of nightmare, with the intelligent, stunned eyes of a man who was seeing a miracle. A stunned silence descended upon the great hall. It was absolute. The screams had died. The guards were frozen, swords half lowered. The nobles were statues of disbelief. Lord Valerius's mask of concern had slipped, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury before he smoothed it over again. With a soft groan, the wolf began to shrink. The transformation reversed, the same sickening sound of shifting bones and contracting muscle, but this time it was a release, not a violation. The black fur receded, the monstrous form collapsing in on itself until the man, the Alpha King, knelt on the floor where the beast had been. He was naked, his body a tapestry of muscle and old scars, gleaming with sweat under the candlelight. He didn't look at his panicked court. He didn't look at his shocked guards. His gaze was locked on Elara. He was on one knee before her, his head still bowed near her hand, which now rested on his bare shoulder. The silver light from her palm had faded, but a tingling warmth remained, a current that arced between them. He lifted his head slowly. The molten gold of his eyes was no longer feral. It was intense, searching, and filled with a raw, possessive awe that terrified her more than the rage had. His hand came up, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. His touch was like lightning, a searing heat that shot up her arm and exploded in her chest. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, rough growl that carried through the silent hall, meant for her but heard by all. It was a declaration, a verdict, a complete reordering of the world. "Every beast in this hall fears my madness," he rasped, his thumb stroking the delicate skin of her inner wrist. You pressed your hand to it and offered it peace. He looked up at her, his gaze pinning her, claiming her, rewriting her entire existence in a single, searing look. Your throne has been waiting. Before she could process the words, before she could even breathe, he rose to his full, intimidating height, pulling her up with him. He ripped a heavy fur cloak from a nearby chair and wrapped it around his own waist, then turned to face the stunned assembly. His authority returned in a crushing wave. "The Concord is over," he commanded, his voice the crack of a whip. "Leave, now." There was no room for argument. It was the voice of absolute power. Lords and ladies, who moments before had been poised to witness his downfall, now scrambled over each other to obey, their fear of the man far greater than their fear of the beast had been. He turned his back on the fleeing nobility, his entire focus narrowing to her. He scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She was still just a scullery maid, clad in a ragged, damp dress, her hair a mess, smelling of soap and fear. Yet she was being held by the Alpha King, who had just proclaimed, what? A throne? It was madness. "What are you doing?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "I am taking what is mine," he growled, his golden eyes burning into hers. The statement was simple, absolute. He strode from the great hall, leaving behind the chaos, the spilled wine, and the shattered remnants of Elara's old life. He carried her through opulent corridors she had only ever scrubbed, past priceless tapestries and ancestral portraits of kings with the same burning, golden eyes. His guards fell into step behind them, a silent, formidable escort. They ascended a spiral staircase into a part of the fortress she had never imagined existed. The King's Tower. He kicked open a heavy oak door and carried her into a vast chamber. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with books and maps. A massive bed, draped in black furs, dominated one side of the room. He did not put her down. He held her, his grip unyielding, as if he feared she might dissolve into smoke if he let go. "Rorik," he snapped without turning. His beta, a scarred warrior with a grim face, appeared in the doorway. "Alpha, send for Morwenna, now, and bring food, everything, and clothes, silks, furs, nothing from the servants' quarter. Do you understand?" "Yes, Alpha," Rorik said, his gaze flickering to Elara with undisguised curiosity before he vanished. Kael finally set her on her feet, but he kept his hands on her shoulders, holding her in place. He stood over her, a mountain of raw power, his presence so overwhelming it felt hard to breathe. The scent of him, pine, winter air, and something uniquely predatory filled her senses. She was trembling, a mix of terror and a strange, exhilarating energy that still hummed beneath her skin from their contact. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "Elara," she stammered. I work in the scullery." A muscle feathered in his jaw. "No, that is what you do. It is not who you are. What are you?" "I don't understand." Her voice broke. Tears of confusion and fear welled in her eyes. "I'm nobody. Please, I didn't mean any harm." "Harm?" A low, humorless chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You walked into a hall of vipers, faced down a maddened wolf, and quelled a rage that my entire guard could not. You did not cause harm, little one. You performed a miracle." He reached out, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch was electric, a searing jolt that made her gasp. The bond, a tangible, undeniable force crackled in the air between them. Before he could say more, an old woman entered the room, leaning heavily on a staff of twisted rowan wood. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of deep wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and startlingly blue. This was Morwenna, the king's healer and seer. Rorik followed her, his arms laden with trays of food: roast chicken, fresh bread, cheese, fruits, a feast that made Elara's stomach ache with desperate longing. Servants trailed behind him with armfuls of rich fabrics. "Leave it, and us," Kael commanded. The beta and servants deposited their burdens and retreated, closing the heavy door behind them. "So," Morwenna said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves, "the prophecies did not lie. After all these centuries." She ignored the king completely, her piercing blue eyes fixed on Elara. She hobbled closer, circling her slowly, sniffing the air like an old hound. "Ah, yes. It's faint. So faint it's almost gone. But it's there, buried deep beneath the grime and the fear." "What is it?" Kael's voice was tight with impatience. Morwenna stopped in front of Elara and gently took her hand, the one she had pressed against the wolf. She turned it over, her gnarled fingers tracing the lines on Elara's palm. "Hers is the blood of the Luminary, the Lightbringers, an anchor for the storm of the Blackmir soul." Elara snatched her hand back. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Luminary?" It sounded like a fairy tale. "Of course you don't, child," Morwenna said gently. "Your power has been bound, suppressed, most likely from birth. A dangerous gift to have in a world that has forgotten it. Your line was thought to have been wiped out during the scourge of the false kings. Someone must have hidden your ancestor away, and the knowledge was lost, the power fading with each generation. Until you." Kael's golden eyes widened with dawning comprehension. "An anchor," he breathed, the word full of a desperate, centuries-old hope. He looked at Elara with a new intensity, one that saw past the Scullery Maid to the legend beneath. "The stories are true. The alpha kings of the Blackmir line are tied to the raw, untamed heart of the wild," Morwenna explained, her gaze shifting between them. "Your power is immense, Your Majesty, but it is a raging fire without a hearth. It will eventually consume you, driving you to the feral madness. It has happened to your uncles, your grandfather. It is the curse of your blood, a curse that only a luminary can soothe. They are not just mates. They are the other half of your soul, the calm to your storm, the anchor that holds your spirit to the mortal shore." It was too much. Elara's head spun. Mate, luminary, anchor, curse. The words were a meaningless storm. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're mistaken. I'm just me. I wash dishes. I'm nobody." "You are not nobody!" Kael's voice boomed, making her flinch. He visibly reined in his temper, the effort costing him. "You are my mate," he said, the words a possessive, undeniable claim. "My wolf knew it the moment your light touched him. My soul has been howling for you since the day I was born. The poison Lord Valerius used. It was designed to sever my control, to make me a monster in front of my own court. He meant to have me destroyed." His eyes narrowed. "He must have known what you were. He must have been trying to flush you out." The memory of Lord Valerius's sickly, malevolent aura flashed in Elara's mind. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. This wasn't an accident. She hadn't just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been the target, or at least, the tool. She sank onto a plush chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The smell of the roasted chicken was agonizing. She was starving, terrified, and her entire reality had just been shattered. Kael seemed to notice her state for the first time. His expression softened, the hard lines of the king giving way to something else, something more personal. He knelt before her, taking a piece of bread and cheese from the tray and holding it out. "Eat," he commanded, but his voice was gentle. Hesitantly, she took it. Her hands trembled as she brought the food to her lips. The taste was explosive, overwhelming. She devoured it in seconds, a low sob of relief and desperation catching in her throat. He said nothing, simply continued to pass her food, a piece of chicken, a handful of grapes, another slice of bread, until the worst of the gnawing hunger subsided. "You are safe here, Elara," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through her. "No one will ever harm you again. You are under my protection. You are everything." She looked at him, at this terrifying, powerful king kneeling before her, feeding her with his own hands. She saw the fierce possessiveness in his gaze, but beneath it, she also saw a profound vulnerability, a deep, aching need that mirrored the loneliness she had felt her entire life. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tangled with a dawning, frightening sense of belonging. The bond between them wasn't just a word. It was a living thing, a warm current flowing in the space between them, and it was pulling her in. The days that followed were a disorienting dream. Elara was kept within the opulent confines of the king's tower, a gilded cage of staggering luxury. The rough wool of her servant's dress was replaced with gowns of velvet and silk that felt alien against her skin. She ate at a small table with Kael himself, the food so rich and plentiful she sometimes felt sick. She slept in a soft, feather-stuffed bed in a chamber adjoining his, the scent of him a constant, disquieting presence in the air. He was rarely far from her side. It was a form of captivity, she knew, but it was a captivity of obsessive protection. He watched her with a hawk-like intensity, as if she were a priceless treasure he had just unearthed. He began her education, not in courtly manners, but in the lore of their people. He and Morwenna would spend hours with her, explaining the history of the Blackmir wolves and the Luminaries. She learned that her light was a balm, a focusing agent. It could not only soothe the feral rage but also amplify an alpha's controlled strength, purify corruption, and heal wounds that even Morwenna's arts could not mend. It was a power that made her a target for anyone who wished to control the throne. Lord Valerius had not been arrested. He had feigned ignorance, claiming the wine must have been tainted by a careless servant, and Kael, without proof and needing to maintain political stability, could do nothing. For now. The threat of him lingered outside the tower walls, a silent poison. The bond between them deepened with every passing day, a strange and often painful intimacy. It was a bridge of sensation that she had no control over. If he was frustrated in a council meeting rooms away, a wave of sharp, irritable anger would wash over her. When she pricked her finger on an embroidery needle, a clumsy foreign task he insisted she learn, he burst into her chambers moments later, his eyes wild with alarm, having felt the tiny spike of pain as if it were his own. One night, she woke from a nightmare, gasping for air, her heart pounding from a dream of being lost in a dark, snarling forest. The door to her chamber flew open, and Kael was there, his face a mask of concern. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice rough with sleep. "A dream," she whispered, clutching the silk sheets. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and sat on the edge of her bed. "I felt your fear. It woke me." He hesitated. Then his hand covered hers. The searing warmth of his touch chased away the lingering shadows of the nightmare. "Tell me." She described the dream, the feeling of being hunted by unseen things. He listened, his expression grim. "That is my mind you were seeing," he said quietly. "The edge of the madness. It is a forest of rage. I have walked it my entire life. Until you." It was the first time he had truly shown her his weakness. Not the feral beast in the hall, but the quiet daily struggle of the man. In that moment, he was not the Alpha King. He was just Kael, a man carrying a terrible burden. An instinct, fierce and protective, rose in her. She squeezed his hand. "You're not alone in there anymore." The words hung in the air between them. His golden eyes searched hers, filled with a raw, desperate gratitude that made her breath catch. He leaned in, his face close to hers, and she thought, with a jolt of panic and anticipation, that he was going to kiss her. But he stopped. His control absolute. "The bond is incomplete," he murmured, his voice strained. "To claim you fully, to mark you before you accept me, it would be a violation. I will not take you by force. You must choose this. You must choose me." He stood and left her chamber, leaving her with a racing heart and the ghost of his heat on her skin. Choice. He was offering her a choice, but it felt like an illusion. How could she choose anything else when every fiber of her being was being rewoven to connect with his? Was this bond a gift or a cage? The test came sooner than she expected. A delegation from the northern packs arrived, led by a grizzled old alpha named Fenrir, whose loyalty to the Blackmir line was ancient but conditional. Lord Valerius saw his chance. He formally requested a conclave of alphas, invoking an old law that allowed the council to question the fitness of a king's chosen mate. "He is calling you a witch," Kael snarled, pacing the length of his solar like a caged tiger. The fury rolling off him was a palpable force, making the very air feel thin. "He claims you have ensorcelled me, that your blood is not pure. He demands a trial of light." "What is a trial of light?" Elara asked, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. Morwenna, who had been summoned, answered grimly. "It is an ancient rite, rarely used. You will be taken to the sunken grotto, to the moon pool within. The pool is said to reflect the truth of a soul. A true luminary's presence will cause the water to glow with pure light. If your blood is tainted, or if you possess no true power, the waters will remain dark, or worse, they will turn black, signifying dark magic." "It's a trap," Elara said immediately. "Valerius wouldn't demand a trial he didn't think he could win. He must have a way to corrupt it." "My thoughts exactly," Kael growled. "I have forbidden it, and the council has invoked the old law to overrule you," Valerius said, stepping into the chamber. He was flanked by 2 of his own guards, his expression one of polite, venomous triumph. "The law is clear, Your Majesty. The stability of the realm requires that the Queen be vetted. The Northern Alphas agree. They will not accept a scullery witch as their queen without proof." Kael moved so fast he was a blur. He had Valerius by the throat, lifting him off the floor, his eyes blazing with the feral light. You will refer to her as your queen, he hissed, his voice a low, deadly promise of violence. And if you ever speak her name with disrespect again, I will rip your lying tongue from your head. Your Majesty, Elara cried out, rushing forward. She placed a hand on Kael's arm. Don't. This is what he wants. To make you look like a tyrant, controlled by his passions. At her touch, some of the tension drained from him. His grip loosened, and he dropped Valerius, who stumbled back, choking and rubbing his throat, a flicker of fear finally showing in his pale eyes. The trial will proceed at dusk, Valerius rasped, recovering his composure. Be ready, little witch. He gave her a smile that was all teeth and swept from the room. Kael turned to her, his face a mask of fury and fear. I cannot stop this. The laws are too old, my hold on the council too fragile since my father's death. Valerius has been sowing dissent for years. He took her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. Elara, He struggled for words, the emotionally repressed king battling the desperate mate. The thought of them putting you in danger, it is unmaking me. The madness my ancestors fell to, it whispers to me that I should burn the castle to the ground, kill every lord who questions you, and carry you away to the wildlands where none could ever touch you. She saw the truth of it in his eyes, the terrifying, tempting allure of absolute destruction in the name of love. It was the heart of the Blackmir curse. But I won't, he continued, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. I will not become that beast. Not for you. He leaned his forehead against hers. I am afraid, he confessed, the admission costing him everything. Not of Valerius, not of his pathetic plots. I am afraid of losing you. Without you, the forest will claim me. There will be no coming back. His vulnerability was a more potent weapon than his rage. It slipped past her defenses, striking a deep, resonant chord within her. This was not about a throne, or power, or destiny. It was about this man, his soul balanced on a knife's edge, and her, inexplicably, being his only counterweight. I am afraid too, she admitted, her own voice barely a whisper. But we will face this, together, together. The words settled between them, a promise and a prayer. For the first time, she did not feel like a captive. She felt like a partner. And as dusk began to fall, casting long, bloody shadows across the stone floors, she knew she would not be walking to her trial as a scullery maid. She would walk as the chosen mate of the Alpha King, and she would not fail. The sunken grotto was a place of deep, primordial magic. A natural cavern deep beneath the fortress. Its air was cool and damp, smelling of wet stone and moss. The only light came from phosphorescent fungi that cast an eerie blue-green glow on the dripping stalactites. In the center of the cavern lay the moon pool, a perfectly circular basin of water so clear and still it looked like a sheet of black glass. Elara stood at its edge, flanked by Kael's obsidian guard. Kael himself stood beside her, his body a rigid wall of tension, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Across the pool, Lord Valerius watched with a smug, expectant air, surrounded by the northern alphas and the lords of the council. Morwenna stood near the entrance, her face grim. The rite is simple, Valerius announced, his voice echoing in the cavern. The girl will place her hands in the water. If she is who the king claims, a luminary of the old blood, the pool will answer with light. If she is a fraud, or worse, a creature of darkness, it will reveal that too. Elara's heart hammered in her chest. She had no idea how to command her power. The light had appeared on its own, an instinctual reaction. What if she couldn't summon it now? What if Valerius was right, and it was all a fluke? She glanced at Kael. His golden eyes were fixed on her, conveying a simple, unwavering message. I have you. Taking a deep breath, she knelt at the edge of the moon pool. The silence in the cavern was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water. She closed her eyes, trying to find that quiet, humming place inside herself, the source of the silver light. She thought of Kael's confession, his fear, the desperate hope in his eyes. She focused on the bond between them, that tangible thread of warmth and energy. She plunged her hands into the icy water. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The water remained a black, placid mirror. A collective gasp went through the assembled lords. Valerius's smile widened. He had won. Then, a tremor ran through the pool. The water began to churn, and a foul, oily blackness started to bleed into it from the bottom, swirling like ink. A stench of decay and corruption filled the air. The water was not just dark, it was turning necrotic. "Witchcraft!" one of the lords shouted. "She has poisoned the sacred pool." Panic started to ripple through the observers. Valerius's expression was one of pure, theatrical triumph. This was his trap. He hadn't just hoped she would fail. He had actively sabotaged the pool with some form of dark magic, ensuring it would indict her. Pain lanced up Elara's arms, a searing, icy cold that felt like it was freezing her blood. The darkness in the water was actively attacking her, trying to consume the fledgling light within her. Fear, sharp and blinding, threatened to overwhelm her. Then she felt Kael's hand on her shoulder, his grip like steel. "Fight it, Elara," he growled, his voice a low command in her ear. "Do not let him win. You are the light. Burn it away." His faith, his raw power flowing into her through the contact, was the spark she needed. Her fear receded, replaced by a sudden, defiant rage. This man, this creature of shadows and plots, would not define her. He would not use her to destroy the one person who had ever looked at her and seen something worthy. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the pain, and pushed back. She didn't just reach for her light. She poured all of her will, her fear, her anger, and her blossoming, terrified love for the man beside her into the pool. A brilliant, silver-white light erupted from her hands. It was not the soft glow from before. It was a blinding, furious nova. It hit the corrupted water like a physical blow, and the pool screamed. A high-pitched, unearthly shriek filled the grotto as the light did battle with the darkness. The black ink recoiled, boiling and hissing as the pure energy tore it apart. The stench of decay was burned away, replaced by the clean scent of ozone and starlight. In a final, explosive pulse, the light scoured the last of the corruption from the moon pool. The water cleared, and then the entire pool began to glow with a soft, steady, internal luminescence, lighting the cavern as brightly as a full moon. Elara collapsed back, pulling her hands from the water, panting. Her arms ached, but it was the clean ache of exertion, not the icy pain of the corruption. Kael caught her, pulling her back against his chest. The assembled lords were speechless, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. The northern alphas stared at the glowing pool, then at Elara, their expressions unreadable. But the trial was not over. It was a diversion. From the shadows near the entrance, Valerius's men moved. They were not dressed as guards, but as black-clad assassins. Two of them grabbed Morwenna, a blade to her throat. Three more lunged not for Kael, but for Elara. It happened in an instant. Kael roared, shoving Elara behind him and drawing his sword. But the assassins were too close. One of them managed to grab her arm, a cloth soaked in a sweet-smelling liquid pressed over her nose and mouth. Her head swam, the world tilting sickeningly. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kael's face, contorted in a mask of pure primal fury, as he cut down one of the men, and Lord Valerius, watching from across the pool, his face a mask of cold, calculating victory. He hadn't needed to win the trial. He just needed the distraction. Elara awoke to the jarring rattle of chains and the damp, musty smell of a dungeon. Her head throbbed, and her limbs felt heavy and unresponsive from the drug. She was shackled to a cold stone wall, the iron cuffs biting into her wrists. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was a prisoner again, but this was infinitely worse than the scullery. Awake at last, my little luminary. Lord Valerius stepped out of the shadows, holding a torch that cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. He looked pleased with himself, a cat who had finally cornered the canary. "Where am I?" Elara demanded, her voice hoarse. "In a place the king will never find you," he said smoothly. "A forgotten holding beneath my own estates. By the time he realizes where to even look, it will be too late." "What do you want?" she spat, pulling at the chains uselessly. He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "What every man wants, my dear. Power. For generations, the Blackmir kings have ruled through brute force, their feral nature a constant threat to the stability of this kingdom. Their strength is a curse, but with an anchor, with a luminary to focus and control that power, it can be honed into an unbreakable weapon. The king is a fool. He sees you as a soulmate, a balm for his tormented spirit." He sneered. "I see you for what you truly are, a key, and I intend to be the one who turns it." He stepped closer, his pale eyes gleaming. "He thinks the bond is mystical, a matter of fate. It is biology, nothing more. A powerful alpha, a luminary. The connection will form regardless of who the alpha is. Once he is dead, you will be bound to me, and you will make me a god." The sheer audacity and vileness of his plan stole her breath. He didn't just want to usurp Kael. He wanted to steal his soulmate, to twist the sacred bond into a tool for his own ambition. A wave of revulsion and fury washed through her. "He will find me," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "And when he does, he will tear you apart." "Oh, I have no doubt he will try," Valerius said dismissively. "He is currently occupied. My men have sealed the grotto and are leading his guards on a merry chase through the western tunnels. By the time he realizes his mistake, I will be long gone, with you in tow." He gestured to a small, ornate dagger on a nearby table. It was carved from some black, glassy stone. "This blade is coated with a rare poison, the same one I used to incite his rage in the hall, only far more concentrated. It will not kill him, not at first. It will sever his control completely, drive him permanently into the feral state. His own guard will be forced to put him down like a rabid dog, a tragic end for a tormented king." Despair threatened to swallow her. Kael was in danger, and she was trapped, helpless. The bond, however, was a two-way street. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of Valerius's triumphant face, and reached for it. She pushed past her own fear and desperation, sending everything she had down that psychic channel. Terror, danger, Valerius, dungeon, trap, poison dagger. She had no idea if he could receive such clear thoughts, but she had to try. Valerius laughed. Praying to your broken king? He cannot hear you, little witch. He is lost in the dark, chasing shadows. Suddenly, a tremor shook the entire dungeon. Dust rained from the ceiling. A deep, guttural roar echoed from somewhere far above, a sound of such apocalyptic fury that the very stones seemed to vibrate with fear. It was not the sound of a man or even a beast. It was the sound of a natural disaster. Valerius's smile faltered. Impossible, he whispered. The roar came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of splintering stone and screaming men. It wasn't a chase. It was a straight line of pure, unstoppable destruction. Kael wasn't looking for her. He was coming for her. He had felt her. Valerius's face contorted with fury. His plan was crumbling. No matter, he snarled, grabbing the poisoned dagger. If I cannot have you, no one will. I will take your power by force. He lunged toward her, the dagger raised. He intended to cut her, to drain her light with some dark ritual. Trapped and defenseless, with the point of the dagger inches from her throat, Elara did the only thing she could. She screamed, but it wasn't just a scream of terror. It was a desperate, primal cry for help, a beacon of pure emotion aimed directly at the bond. And she fought back. As Valerius grabbed her, she channeled that same defiant rage she'd felt at the moon pool. She couldn't make a nova of light, not while she was drugged and chained, but she could create a spark. A blinding, searing flash of silver light erupted from her body, striking Valerius square in the chest. It wasn't enough to seriously injure him, but the shock of it sent him stumbling back, howling in pain and fury, his eyes temporarily blinded. It was the opening that was needed. The dungeon door didn't open. It exploded inward, blasted off its hinges by a force of raw power. Kael stood there, but it was barely him. He was in his half-shifted state, claws extended from his fingertips, his face elongated into a feral snarl, his golden eyes burning with the light of 1,000 suns. He was no longer a king. He was a reckoning. His gaze fell on Valerius, then on the dagger in his hand, then on the chains binding Elara. A sound of pure murder escaped his throat. He moved. It wasn't a run. It was an apparition. One moment he was at the door. The next he was on Valerius. A blur of black fur and righteous fury. The fight was brutally, terrifyingly short. Valerius tried to bring the dagger up, but Kael's claws tore through his arm, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. He lifted Valerius by the throat, the same way he had in the solar, but this time there was no restraint. There was no queen to calm him. There was only the beast, unleashed to protect its mate. "Kael, no!" Elara cried out, her voice raw. If he killed Valerius in this state, he might never come back from it. Her voice cut through his rage. He froze, his claws digging into Valerius's flesh, a single drop of blood welling up. He turned his head, his burning eyes finding hers. He was on the very brink of the abyss, the forest of madness she had seen in her dreams. She met his gaze, pouring every ounce of love, calm, and strength she possessed into the bond. "I have you," she sent, echoing his own words back to him. "Come back to me." The feral light in his eyes flickered. The snarl on his face softened. The taut, inhuman lines of his body relaxed. With a guttural roar of frustration, he hurled Valerius into the far wall, where the Lord crumpled into a broken, unconscious heap. The beast had been tamed once more. Kael strode to her, his claws retracting. He tore the heavy iron chains from the wall as if they were made of paper, then gently broke the cuffs on her wrists. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his massive body trembling with the aftermath of his rage. "I have you," he growled, the words a sacred vow. "I have you." He held her tightly, anchoring himself to her, the storm of his soul finding its calm harbor. She was safe. They were together. But she knew with a cold certainty that this was not the end. A man like Valerius would not be defeated so easily. His final, most desperate gambit was yet to come. The aftermath of the abduction was swift and brutal. Lord Valerius was stripped of his titles and lands, his co-conspirators on the council exposed and exiled. He was imprisoned in the deepest, most secure cell in the fortress, awaiting a final judgment. For a brief, blissful period, a fragile peace settled over the castle. But Elara knew it was the quiet before a much larger storm. Her power, now fully awakened, was a constant presence within her. It was a warm, silver light that hummed just beneath her skin, a wellspring of energy she was slowly learning to command. Morwenna tutored her daily, teaching her to draw on it, to shape it. She learned to mend torn cloth with a touch, to soothe the skittish horses in the stables, to make withered plants bloom again. They were small acts, but they were proof that the magic was truly hers. Her bond with Kael had become the center of her universe. It was a constant, silent conversation. She felt the heavy weight of his crown during long council meetings, and he felt the flutter of her excitement when she successfully coaxed a rosebush into flowering out of season. He no longer hid his vulnerability from her, and she no longer feared his power. They were two halves of a whole, and the thought of being without him was now a physical ache. The final confrontation came on the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. A warning cry went up from the battlements. A small army, bearing the old standard of the Vanthorn house, was marching on the fortress. But they were not attacking the gates. They were marching towards the old aqueduct system that fed water to the castle and the surrounding village. "He's escaped," Kael snarled, buckling on his armor. Rorik, his beta, confirmed it. Valerius was gone from his cell. Several guards, loyal to his house, had freed him and fled with him. "Why the aqueduct?" Elara asked, her mind racing. "He can't take the fortress from there." "He doesn't intend to take it," Kael said, his face grim as he strapped a wicked-looking axe to his belt. "He intends to poison it. Not just the castle, but the entire village. He will slaughter hundreds of innocents to spite me." It was a villain's final, desperate act of spite, an attack not on the king, but on his people. "I'm coming with you," Elara said, her voice firm. "No, it's too dangerous. You will remain here where you are safe." His command was absolute, the Alpha King's law. "And do what?" she challenged, stepping in front of him, blocking his path to the door. "Wait here and feel you die through our bond? No. My power is not just for soothing your rage or making flowers grow. Morwenna said it can purify corruption. If he has poison, I am the only one who can stop it. I am not your weakness, Kael. I am your weapon." He stared at her, the king's authority warring with the mate's protective instinct. He saw the iron resolve in her eyes, the defiant set of her jaw. She was no longer the frightened scullery maid. She was a queen, ready to fight for her kingdom. A slow, proud smile touched his lips. "Very well, my queen," he conceded. "Stay by my side." They rode out at the head of the Obsidian Guard, a storm of black steel and fury under the cold moonlight. They found Valerius and his 50 men at the main reservoir, a large, stone-lined basin that fed the network of aqueducts. Valerius stood at the edge holding a large, crackling orb of black crystal. It pulsed with a sickening, necrotic energy, the same dark magic that had tainted the moon pool, but magnified 1,000 times. "King Kael!" Valerius shouted, his voice ringing with mad glee. "Come to watch the end of your precious kingdom. This orb contains enough concentrated blight to poison every drop of water for a generation. Surrender your throne and your mate to me, or I will drop it and condemn your people to a slow, agonizing death." He was holding the entire region hostage. Kael's guard fanned out, but Valerius's men formed a protective circle around him, their swords drawn. It was a standoff. "There is no version of this where you walk away, Valerius," Kael called back, his voice dangerously calm. "I do not intend to walk away," Valerius laughed. "I intend to rule, or to watch you rule over a kingdom of ashes." Elara knew what she had to do. While Kael held his attention, she had to get to that orb. She looked at Kael, and through the bond, she sent a clear message. "Trust me. Create a diversion." His golden eyes met hers, and he gave a barely perceptible nod. Then he roared, a challenge that shook the very ground, and charged. Not at Valerius, but at the line of his soldiers. The Obsidian Guard followed, and the night erupted into a symphony of screaming men and clashing steel. The diversion was all she needed. Slipping away into the shadows along the edge of the reservoir, Elara circled around the main melee. Valerius, his attention fixed on the magnificent, brutal spectacle of Kael carving a path through his men, didn't see her approaching from behind. She was 10 feet away when he sensed her. He whirled around, his face a mask of shock and rage. "You!" He thrust the orb at her, and a bolt of black energy shot out, striking her in the chest. The pain was immense, a soul-deep cold that felt like it was extinguishing her light. She cried out, stumbling back, the silver glow at her core flickering violently. "Your light cannot defeat this," Valerius crowed. "This is the essence of despair, of decay. It will consume you." He was right. Her power alone wasn't enough. The orb was an anchor of pure darkness, created through some horrific ritual. But she was not alone. Kael felt her pain as if a spear had been thrust through his own chest. He roared her name and fought with a renewed, terrifying ferocity, breaking through the last of Valerius's guards. He was coming for her. Elara gritted her teeth, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. She needed to buy him time. She focused all her power, not into an attack, but into a shield. A wall of pure silver light that held the orb's corrupting influence at bay. Cracks began to form in her shield, the dark energy pounding against it. Just as her strength was about to fail, Kael was there. He didn't attack Valerius. He ran straight to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his body a solid wall of warmth and strength. "I have you," he growled into her ear. "Now let it go. All of it." He wasn't telling her to surrender. He was telling her to unleash everything. He became her anchor, his immense vitality pouring into her through the bond, stoking her flickering light into a blazing inferno. He was the hearth for her fire. Her fear vanished, replaced by an absolute certainty. Together. She dropped her shield and let her power surge forth, uncontrolled and absolute. A blinding, silent explosion of pure white-silver light erupted from her. A wave of purification that was not violent, but absolute. It struck the orb in Valerius's hands. The dark crystal screamed, a sound that vibrated in the soul. It tried to fight back, to consume the light, but it was like trying to swallow the sun. The light poured into it, purifying its necrotic magic from the inside out. Cracks of silver light spread across its black surface. Valerius, holding the orb, screamed as the pure energy washed over him, not burning his flesh, but scouring the corruption from his spirit. It was an agony beyond imagining, the forced purification of a soul steeped in darkness. With a final, deafening crack, the orb shattered, dissolving into a harmless cloud of glittering dust. The dark magic was gone. Valerius collapsed to the ground, not dead, but broken, his eyes wide and vacant. The madness and ambition burned out of him, leaving only a hollow, empty shell. The fighting stopped. Valerius's remaining men dropped their swords, staring in awe and terror at the woman who glowed with the light of a star, held in the arms of their savage king. Elara's power receded, leaving her exhausted but whole. She sagged back against Kael, her legs giving out. He held her fast. The long night was over. The kingdom was safe. Their kingdom. In the quiet aftermath, with Valerius and his men secured, Kael led Elara away from the reservoir, back towards the silent fortress. He stopped in a small, moon-drenched clearing, away from the eyes of his men. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He touched her face, his gaze full of wonder. "We were," she corrected softly. He smiled, a true, genuine smile that transformed his harsh features. "Yes, we were." He grew serious, his golden eyes searching hers. "I asked you to choose me. Here, now, with all threats ended, I ask you again, Elara, choose me." There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. This terrifying, possessive, vulnerable king was her home. "I choose you, Kael," she whispered. "I will always choose you." It was all the permission he needed. He lowered his head, his lips finally claiming hers in a kiss that was both a tender exploration and a fierce, possessive staking of a claim. It was a kiss that sealed 1,000 promises. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were burning with intent. "Then you are mine," he growled, his voice dropping low and primal. "As I am yours, forever." He turned his head, exposing the strong column of his neck. "Mark me, Elara. Claim your king." For a moment, she was shocked, but she understood. This was not about submission. It was about balance, equality. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to the warm skin of his neck. Then, following an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she bit down. Not hard, but enough to break the skin. A jolt of his power, wild and untamed, surged into her. He groaned, a deep guttural sound of pleasure and completion. Then, he gently turned her, exposing her own neck. "My turn," he murmured against her skin, his breath hot. She felt the sharp pressure of his canines against her shoulder, and then a brief, sharp pain that blossomed immediately into a wave of pure, ecstatic energy. The bond, incomplete for so long, slammed into place. It was like a dam breaking. A torrent of memories, emotions, and sensations flooded between them. She felt his lonely childhood, the crushing weight of his crown, the constant battle against the madness. He felt her years of hunger and invisibility, her terror in the great hall, the blossoming of her love for him. Their souls merged, their minds intertwined, their magic knotted together into a single, unbreakable cord. The howling in his blood went silent, replaced by the steady, peaceful song of her light. Months later, Queen Elara stood on the battlements of the Blackmir fortress, Kael's arm wrapped securely around her waist. She was no longer dressed in silks forced upon her, but in practical, elegant leathers befitting a warrior queen. Below, the lands were green and thriving. The kingdom was at peace, stronger and more stable than it had been in generations, ruled not by a king and his consort, but by an alpha and his luminary, a storm and his anchor. She rested a hand on her stomach, where the faint stirrings of two new lives, twin heartbeats she could feel with her magic, were just beginning. Kael placed his hand over hers, his golden eyes soft as he looked down at her. "I spent my entire life fighting the beast within me," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I thought it was my curse, but it was only ever a part of my soul, waiting for its other half to come home." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady, peaceful rhythm of his heart. The Scullery Maid was a ghost of a memory. The frightened girl was gone. In her place was a queen, a mate, a mother-to-be, and a woman who had faced down darkness and found her destiny not in a throne, but in the heart of a king who was also a beast. And she had tamed him, not by breaking him, but by making him whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.